We're about to get into it with one of my favorite guests. I think she brought all the warmth and the sunshine in here. She made her way onto the to stables, and a former jockey and, of course, a broadcaster at NBC. You always see her after the race with a very, very emotional jockey and a tired horse. She is Donna Barton Brothers. We welcome her back on from NBC. What's going on? Welcome back to the Charm City. You bring your charm with you, right?
Yeah, Nestor, thanks for having me on. I'm glad to know I made the segment of the show that's rounding for home, and I haven't faded to last yet. So
well,
I'm still in the hunt.
Yeah, you're hanging in there. You're gamely, I would say, at this point. Hey, this horse, we have a chance to have a triple crown here. I guess it's obvious when a horse goes wire to wire in that kind of a field on that kind of a day, and is going to be an odds-on favorite on Saturday. That's what the whole industry looks for. That's what the industry feeds off of, is that kind of energy you're going to get in New York a couple of weeks from now, but there's still a couple of minutes of racing on Saturday to dispute that, right?
Yeah, the great thing about the Preakness is that 99.9% of the time the Derby winner comes here, and so the dream is always alive that we're going to have a Triple Crown winner. And I think, we forget how quickly, right, that it was 37 years between the second to the last one and the last one we had, but that's okay. We've seen it happen now. We know it's possible, and there's no reason for that dream not to be alive this time. I mean, as impressively as Always Dreaming was in the Kentucky Derby, not only did he show tactical speed, he showed the ability to relax, and he also showed that he could get the distance. So he's got a lot of things going for him, Nestor.
Well, let's talk about Pletcher a little bit and talk about his role in all of this. I had Bob Baffert on the show a little earlier, and I know he's not making the trip this year. The game for me, and again, the backdrop of all of this is, where's the Preakness going to be? Is the track going to – and that's been the backdrop for 25 years of my radio career, and Laurel is part of the story this week, but part of the story is horse racing and the stars of horse racing, amongst, you being amongst them and selling the story and telling the story. Pletcher's an unbelievable story with his nose pressed up to the glass for a long time as an Eclipse winner, but also a guy that if you were saying he's a baseball player, you'd still say he's 29. I mean, he's got a lot of horse racing ahead of him as a guy who has really come into his own as a star here.
Yeah, and here's the thing. You have to keep in mind, he's the number one leading North American trainer by earnings. His stable has made nearly $340 million, which means he's probably got close to $30 million in the clip, and he still works like a guy who's hungry. I mean, he shows up at the barn every day before 5 o'clock. He loves what he does. He's passionate about it. His family fully supports him. He is 8-0 in the Preakness Stakes. He's had 1 third-place finish, no seconds, but he really doesn't run that much in the Preakness, as we know. I mean, he was 40, I think, something like 46-1 going into the Derby. So 8-0 in the Preakness isn't quite so bad, but he also hasn't brought the Kentucky Derby horse here, a starter from the Kentucky Derby, since Super Saver in 2010. So, we don't see him at this race a lot, and I think part of that is because it oftentimes he doesn't feel like he has a lot to gain from bringing a horse here who's been beaten in the Kentucky Derby. He likes to do the best thing for the horse, but this horse, you couldn't take the chance away to win the Triple Crown with him.
Well, and maybe that does beg the question about these races, and we've brought this up, and I know a few years ago there was a movement to say, hey, maybe we should spread these races out. Maybe the Preakness should be the first week of June, and maybe the Belmont should be 4th of July weekend or like that. And I know that, some of that has gone away, but this race wasn't always run 2-2-3 the way this thing is at this point. And a guy like Pletcher would be an industry guy to say, I don't usually do this. This isn't great for our horses. It's not the best way to do it. It's just sort of the way we've been doing it for 50 years.
Yeah, I'm in the camp that thinks that, and I've always been in the camp that thinks it should stay exactly the way it is. It hasn't always been the way it is. Sometimes the spacing with these Triple Crown winners has been even closer together. I think, in fact, when Sir Barton won the Derby and the Preakness Stakes, they were 4 or 5 days apart, and he had to take a train ride up to Baltimore after the Derby race. So I think, it's what makes a great horse is all those things that it takes to be able to win this series of races in a 5-week period of time. And I don't think any true horsemen are much in favor of saying, hey, let's do this with inferior horses instead, because we don't have great horses anymore. And American Pharoah showed that the right horse comes along and everything can come together to make it happen.
You mentioned American Pharoah and Baffert not being here, and I talked to him a little bit about this. Boy, the star power of that horse, it still resonates. I mean, Bob told me a story, almost bring tears to your eyes, that he went to visit the horse 2 weeks ago, and, I asked him if the horse recognizes him, and I know you've been on a million horses, a million more than I. My wife's still trying to get me on my first horse, although I'm bucking that idea at this point, Donna. But, at 48, I'm thinking they're just better to bet on and look at and admire from afar at this point. But, in the case of American Pharoah, that really was a story that was a generational story that I think we begin that chase again, this weekend, right?
Well, the thing that made American Pharoah so lovable is how approachable he was. So I don't know if you remember after he won the Belmont Stakes and Baffert did the interview, and he had his assistant Jimmy Barnes standing there just holding American Pharoah between them. He and the jockey Victor Espinoza were sitting there in sort of like stage chairs. And the horse, American Pharoah, was just standing there like he's just, hey, hanging out with the guys. And I actually went to go visit him at Coolmore last year as well, and I pet him a little bit, and he was just standing out in the sun, and I asked the guys, does he like this attention, or would he rather be in a stall? And they said, no, when it's time to go in the stall, we're going to have to, push him back into the barn. And sure enough, at the end of the visit, they had to kind of, push on his butt and go, come on, buddy, you got to go back home. He just loves to be out there with the people, and that's what makes him so lovable for people and so memorable. And I think really what won a place in Bob Baffert's heart, because he was in his barn every day.
Well, we talk about the bloodlines, and that horse is going to be putting horses into these races, we think, in the coming years. In the case of Always Dreaming, also incredible bloodlines there for all these animals. You see all the sires, all the mares, and they're very recognizable names if you follow the Triple Crown over the last decade.
Right, absolutely. I mean, the American Pharoah, his name just suddenly escaped me. He was by Pioneer of the Nile, whose grandsire was Empire Maker and whose great-grandsire was Unbridled. Well, this horse, Always Dreaming, is similarly bred in that he's by a horse named Bodemeister, whose grandsire is Empire Maker and his great-grandsire is Unbridled. So, we've got the bloodlines here to see this happen again, but certainly there's something to pedigree. You've got to have the stamina in there, and that's, I think, where the pedigree shows up.
Everybody's been trying to chase Always Dreaming here, especially the gamblers on Saturday. Some thoughts about Royal Mo not being here. That, it's very unfortunate when we don't get the best creatures here to make it, the kind of race that makes it more fun, I think, to wager on. Some would say the longer odds are better, but and that's a more difficult proposition, I think, on the third weekend of May.
Yeah, I think, you could still probably get a price horse in there. The horse that I like at a price is Cloud Computing. I can't honestly say this horse, based on his past performances, can beat Always Dreaming. But I can honestly say that if Always Dreaming, Classic Empire, and Conquest Mo end up in a really heated pace up front, that it could set up for a horse who's in a nice stalking position. I just don't see it setting up for one of the deep closers in the field, of which there are plenty. Cloud Computing, I could see putting in there, on the bottom of whoever you like.
Classic Empire overlooked here, a little bit overshadowed by this other, great horse for now, I would say.
Well, I unfortunately didn't go to the wedding, so hopefully I'm not going to the funeral. I didn't pick Always Dreaming in the Derby, but I think he's going to be very difficult to beat in the Preakness Stakes, and just the opposite for me with Classic Empire. I like him going into the Derby, and I don't like him now going into the Preakness Stakes. I felt like he was pretty much beat up badly in the Kentucky Derby. He was knocked sideways, had his feet knocked out from underneath it, away from the starting gate, got shuffled back further than what he's used to, was 5 wide in the second turn. So I felt like that was a really hard race on him, and it was a race that was back in 3 weeks off the Arkansas Derby, and now he's coming back in 2 weeks off of that. And so while I love the connections of Classic Empire, I respect the horse. I think going into the Derby, that on paper, to me, he was the best horse in the race. I don't like him for this race on Saturday.
She is Donna Brothers. She is Donna B. Brothers out on Twitter as well as at NBC. You'll see her before, during, and after the race on Saturday, and she'll be here at Old Hilltop all weekend long, chronicling all things for NBC. Last thing on the actual race, you talk about Classic Empire getting pinched in the way that he did 2 weeks ago. Those kinds of conditions, and you're out there afterward to see a creature get away as clean as that creature did, and to have a jockey be that clean when roses are coming out and tears are coming out and emotions are coming out, and you're on that, you're on the backstretch there trying to conduct an interview. I just found that to be an amazingly poignant part of this. It was almost like the light shined down on the horse because that horse was so clean and everyone else was such a mess.
Yeah, it's reminiscent of the American Pharoah photos. Remember the head-ons from when he won the Preakness Stakes,
sure.
and he was the only horse in the race that had no mud on him, and everybody else was just covered in mud. And so, yeah, it was a lot like that. And, I will say in defense of the horses that were able to close it all, that was some really heavy mud on the Derby track that day at Churchill Downs. And so those horses that were coming from behind were carrying at least 5 or 10 more pounds than they started out with because of all the mud that they were carrying from having that thrown back on them throughout the entire race. So hats off to horses like Looking at Lee and Classic Empire who were able to close it all. I'm just not sure this kind of race is going to be for them, though.
Donna, sometimes I take a few notes here. You were talking about Pletcher and how much money he's made and that he gets up every morning and shovels and does his thing. You said he loves what he does. You love what you do. I mean, I think everybody that I meet in the horse racing biz, and it's a little bit of a traveling carny here. Once a year you come through, all the legends come through, and, the other 51 weeks a year we're talking about the Orioles and the Ravens and the Terps and the stuff that we do here. But anytime I'm around it, I realize that I'm around it a couple of days a year. You guys are around it every day. And all of you love what you do. And this is one of those weekends where I think all of you think or hope or believe that everyone like myself that goes out there as a teenager and probably has a couple of beverages on the infield and whatnot, that 30 years later you'd love horse racing. I know you wrote a book about loving horse racing and about someone who would go to the track for the first time as an adult and love horses or animals but not understand how to gamble on it, not understand how it works a little bit. You wrote a great book about this a few years ago, and I want to give you a chance to talk about that because I think everyone's a dummy at the racetrack. We all need a dummy's guide for how to do this, especially on a crazy day out there with the bands and the beer and the crab cakes and all the revelry.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like a dummy at the track still, Nestor. So we all get slayed every now and then out here. But yeah, I do love it. And I was a jockey, as you well know, for a long time, and then I went from that to broadcasting. And it was in that transition that I realized just how esoteric our sport is and how exclusive we are and the lingo that we use. And I just thought, there just has to be a way where people can, bridge the gap here. And I looked, and there were no books that were just like, here, let's explain this or let's explain that. So Inside Guide to Horse Racing was written with the thought in mind that maybe somebody wants to come to the track just to learn more about being a jockey or how people become a jockey because they know somebody who's little and be a good jockey. So there's a whole chapter on jockeys and how several of them got started. But if you don't care about that, don't read that chapter. There's also a whole chapter on wagering, like how you should wager, when you should wager. There's another chapter on how to pick your horse out, like if you are going to bet, how do you decide which horse to bet? Another chapter for the women on what to wear to the races. And how to find out what to wear to the races. So, yeah, I wrote the book to try to bridge the gap and especially for people like you, Nestor, who've been coming to the track for a while. You understand it, and then you take a first-timer with you, and they wear you out with 1,000 questions. You can give them this book in advance so you don't get peppered with the questions.
Hey, have you ever had a chance to, put a hat and a dress on and just go to the Derby, or has that never been your thing? I mean, have you ever been a fan at the track? Because people that work in it really work in it, and your mind's always working in it, I think, especially someone like you that's been on these animals so many times.
Yeah, when I was 19 years old, before I became a jockey, I did the whole hat and dress thing once. And then when I was a jockey, I had my apprenticeship up at Rockingham Park for part of my apprenticeship, which was up in New Hampshire, and I happened to get a 4-day suspension, which would have gone over Derby weekend. My sister was living in Kentucky and said, come to the track. So we did the track and from the backside, from the infield. So I've seen the hat and dress, I've seen the backside, I've seen the infield, and now my favorite perspective is on my horse interviewing the winner after the race. And so now that I've got to try it all, I know I prefer this one. I'm going to try to keep this gig for a while.
Yeah, I want you to keep that gig because I enjoy you. We'll see who you're talking to on Saturday afternoon. I know everybody's got an opinion on this thing. We love having the race here in Baltimore, and there's been a lot of conjecture about that. I've never spoken to anyone on or off the record, not even, out of the side of their mouth, that doesn't enjoy coming to Baltimore. This is apparently, for all the people in the industry, this is the low-key kind of fun place to come in and do a race. New York's grand and large, and especially when there's Triple Crown, and obviously in Kentucky it's a complete national holiday. Here it's a little more low-key, right?
Yeah, I love coming here, but Nestor, you're one of the reasons. I mean, there are so many enthusiastic broadcasters here in Baltimore who love sports. They love their baseball teams. They love all of the sports. And they love it when horse racing comes because it gives them just another sport to love, which is one of the reasons why we love coming here. You guys love us.
Well, I appreciate the time as always. You always make a little time. We love watching the NBC broadcast. I always tell you, I feel cheated when I go to the real Derby. I don't get to see the 5 hours of broadcasting. I do watch the Oaks stuff. I haven't been to the Derby in a couple of years, and I don't know that I'm making it out to the track this weekend, but one of the joys is sitting and watching you guys tell the stories of all the creatures, of all the connections, of all the trainers, of all the owners, and I know this is rich with storylines. I do love the storyline. I don't love it, but I love the story of survival of one of my Venezuelan brothers there in Guanabara having been kidnapped a couple of times. I mean, it's just an incredible story of how this gentleman made his way here and now has a chance to win the Preakness.
Yeah, Antonio Sano was kidnapped the second time in Venezuela for 36 days, and his family didn't think they would ever see him again. In fact, there were lots of rumors swirling that he wasn't ever going to be seen again. And so it's such an incredible story that he rebuilt his life. But not only that, his son, Alessandro Sano, also known as Alex, is a sophomore in college. He wants to be a vet, so he's planning on going to vet school. So Derby week, he was finishing up his final exams down at Florida. He was on the soccer team, and he was also helping his father with the managing the racing stable. So definitely a family who has worked for all of their rewards, and they definitely have some good things coming.
I want to eat some fresh arepas and have some Polar Cerveza with that family if they win on Saturday. Hey, Don, always a pleasure having you on. We'll send everybody out to visit you out on Twitter, Donna B. Brothers, as well as out on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. The book is Inside Track, Insider's Guide to Horse Racing. Donna Barton Brothers, our guest here. Lovely to have you, and we'll see you again, I'm sure, in 52 weeks. We're almost like Alan Alda in that movie. Same time next year.
Oh, God. Not like that, Nestor.
Not like that, but, once a year we do. No, I didn't mean like that. I meant like for radio purposes. Have fun. Say hello to Bob Costas and Mike Tariq, everybody that's in. Have a great broadcast. And at least we brought some good weather this year. No rain for you this year like 2 years ago.
Yeah, you enjoy it from the climate-controlled environment of your living room, Nestor. Good to talk to you.
Beer's cheap, too. We'll see you soon. There she goes, Donna Brothers. Donna B. Brothers, the way to find her out on Twitter. The book is Inside Track, Insider's Guide to Horse Racing. Donna Barton Brothers, TV commentator and former top jockey. And she's got an active Twitter out there as well and says that her views are not necessarily those expressed of NBC, which I always love when media people put that up there because that means, I'm going to follow that person. You can find me out in the Bahia Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. The morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. It's all brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Any breaking news, and the Orioles are moving guys up and back and forth, and pitchers, and the mess we had with 13 innings the other night, you get that first on the WNST tech service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Races in town, Orioles in town taking on the Blue Jays all weekend long. We got you covered for all sorts of stuff around here. I'm out on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.